You are listening to Morning Edition on 89.3 WFPL. I'm Bill Burton, and it's Friday, and it's just not a good Friday without science behind the forecast with Wave 3 meteorologist Tawana Andrew. Good morning, Tawana.
Good morning. We're talking about something that kind of makes the atmosphere a little topsy-turvy.
Well said. We're talking inversions today in all of its forms. What do we need to know about inversions?
Yeah, they're not really a well-known weather phenomena, but they can play a big role in the type of weather that an area sees. So as you rise from the ground and go higher in our atmosphere through the troposphere, which is the level of the atmosphere closest to the surface, the temperature as you go up typically decreases. So you have colder air sitting above warm air. And with a temperature inversion, you actually have temperatures increasing
Hmm.
as you climb through the atmosphere. So that warm layer is sitting over cold air. Think a warm blanket over a cold bed kind of a situation.
Yeah,
Um,
okay.
so inversions can dictate how clouds form, the types of precipitation you see in an area, and even invisibility. So an inversion is basically a Tupperware lid on the bowl that is our atmosphere. Um,
That's a great visual.
yeah, I feel like everybody knows what to do with those, right?
Indeed.
So what it does, it basically limits the upward movement of air from the lower parts of the atmosphere. And by doing that, it prevents air pollutants, smoke, dust from being dispersed across our atmosphere. And that causes an accumulation of particles, which can reduce visibility
Mm.
and cause health issues for anybody with breathing
Oh,
ailments.
oh,
That's why in the summer, you tend not to have a lot of movement in the atmosphere when we have inversions like that, and people with asthma have a little bit more of those issues on those
mm,
days.
okay.
It also limits convection. So that limit of convection, it's not that air is not moving around, the heat is not moving around in the atmosphere, and that keeps clouds from growing too high, and that prevents precipitation from happening if the cloud isn't able to grow. And if the air is colder at the bottom of an inversion, like it usually is, you'll actually end up with fog forming in some
Ah,
areas when there's an inversion.
okay. That's
There's
the inversion I understand.
Most people know the one that causes fog, and that actually is a ground inversion. So a ground inversion forms when you have that air cooled by contact with a colder surface until the air temperature drops below that of the atmosphere above. So
Hmm.
basically, you have a ground inversion happening on clear nights when ground temperatures drop quickly due to radiational cooling. That air comes on top of that. And when the temperature drops below or meets the dew point, then you end up with fog forming.
Okay.
So that's the first one. There's a second one, a frontal inversion. That happens when you have cold air moving through. And basically, what it does is kind of slides under and shimmies under a warm air mass and
Okay.
lifts it. So that typically happens when you have a front moving through an area,
Hmm.
hence the frontal inversion.
Okay.
There are turbulence inversions, and those
Oh.
form when you have calm air sitting over turbulent air. And in that turbulent air, the consistent movement starts pushing the heat towards the ground, and eventually it cools the upper parts of that layer. And eventually, the air below becomes colder than the calm, warm air above, which is not necessarily the best of things to fly through if you were a
No,
plane.
not
Uh,
at all.
Subsidence inversions happen when you basically have a large slab of air sinking through the atmosphere. Think about, I think the best way I can describe it is when you have a plate sinking into a sink that is full of water, kind
Oh,
of that
okay.
same kind of a movement. And this layer is heated and compressed. That actually results in an increase in atmospheric pressure, thus reducing the temperature rate of change. So as the air sinks low enough, especially at higher altitudes, the higher altitudes become warmer than the air beneath it, creating an inversion. So some
Hmm.
crazy things happening in our atmosphere. We can have temperature inversions that typically happen during the late afternoon and early evening, and those will last through sunrise or shortly after into the next day. For anybody who's just like sitting back, maybe on their patio, their porch, you're just like, I wonder if that's an inversion. You're trying to figure out what's going on. Here are a few signs that you can look
Okay.
for.
Yeah.
One, Clear skies, so no clouds overhead at all.
Okay.
You have calm winds, so wind less than 3 miles per hour. The time of day is usually around sunrise or sunset.
Hmm.
If you see some dew present, um, if you're looking at smoke, let's say if there's some smoke coming up from someone's chimney and it goes up and then just kind of goes horizontally, that's an excellent sign of an
Oh,
inversion.
okay.
And ground fog in lower lying areas. You see the pictures all the time of valleys filled with fog and the
Hmm.
sky is crisp and clear above it. Perfect example of an inversion.
That's an inversion. Okay. And we know all of this now that inversion isn't just one thing, there's variations of it. And we know it all now, thanks to this edition of Science Behind the Forecast with Wave 3 meteorologist Tawana Andrew. Thanks for the knowledge, Tawana.
Of course.